The silence in our house had developed its own personality over the last 3 months. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a waiting silence, a patient hum that vibrated with the anticipation of Sarah's return. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the furnace felt like a countdown. Today was the day. After 94 days of her being 2,000 miles away in Portland, caring for her supposedly gravely ill brother David, my wife was finally coming home. I'd spent the entire morning transforming our quiet suburban home into a festival of welcome. Red and gold balloons, her favorite colors, crowded the ceiling of the living room. A banner I'd painstakingly painted myself screamed, "Welcome home, Sarah," in slightly wobbly letters across the main archway. Her favorite meal, a ridiculously complex seafood paella, was simmering on the stove, its saffron-infused aroma a stark contrast to the instant ramen and frozen pizzas that had been my sustenance for the past 3 months. I was a good husband, a supportive husband. That's what I told myself every time a wave of loneliness threatened to pull me under. Her calls had been the lifeline I clung to. They were always late at night, after she'd supposedly spent another grueling day at David's bedside. Her voice was always a tapestry of exhaustion and stress. "Oh, Mark," she'd sigh, the static on the line crackling like a dying fire. "It was a rough day. His fever spiked again. The doctors are still running tests. It's some kind of rare bacterial infection they can't get a handle on." The details were always vague, shrouded in the fog of medical jargon she claimed she didn't understand. I never pressed. How could I? My beautiful, compassionate wife was sacrificing her life to care for her only sibling. The least I could do was provide unwavering support, both emotional and financial. I drained a significant portion of our savings and wired it to her, no questions asked. "For the experimental treatments, Mark, his insurance won't cover them all," she'd explained, her voice thick with manufactured gratitude. I felt a surge of pride every time I hit confirm transfer. I was providing for my family, protecting them, even from a distance. My sister Chloe had been the only one to voice any skepticism. We were on a video call a few weeks ago, and I was lamenting how tired Sarah sounded. "It's just weird, Mark," Chloe said, her brow furrowed. "I mean, David's been recovering for weeks now. You'd think he'd be up for a 5-minute FaceTime call just to say hi. I've never even met the guy." I'd bristled with defensiveness. "He's weak, Chloe. He's embarrassed by how he looks. Sarah said he's lost a lot of weight. You don't understand how serious this is." I'd hum out feeling righteous, angry that she would dare plant a seed of doubt. Looking back, she wasn't planting a seed. She was pointing at a fully grown, poisonous tree I refused to see. The conflict was entirely internal. It was my faith in my wife versus the gnawing emptiness of our home. It was the joy of hearing her voice versus the sting of her constant unavailability. It was the pride in my sacrifice versus the alarming speed at which our savings account was dwindling. But love, I told myself, is about sacrifice. Marriage is about weathering storms, even when you're in different boats. I was so convinced of my own nobility. The turning point came last Tuesday. My boss called me into his office, a rare and usually ominous event. But instead of a lecture, he offered me a promotion, senior project manager. It came with a corner office, and more importantly, a substantial raise. My first thought was of Sarah. I imagined telling her over the phone, but the idea felt hollow. This was news that deserved to be shared in person, to be celebrated with a kiss and a bottle of champagne. An idea, brilliant and romantic, bloomed in my mind. Her flight home was scheduled for the following Monday. What if I flew out to Portland on Friday and surprised her? I could help her pack, take some of the burden off her shoulders, and we could fly back together. I pictured the look on her face, the shock, the relief, the overwhelming love. It would be the perfect end to a terrible chapter. I booked the ticket that afternoon, a giddy excitement bubbling in my chest. I didn't tell her, wanting the surprise to be absolute. I packed a small bag, watered the plants one last time, and on Friday morning I took a cab to the airport, feeling like the hero in a romance movie. The flight was a blur of daydreams. The taxi ride from Portland Airport was even worse. I had the address she'd given me for David's apartment clutched in my hand. As the cab pulled up, I felt the first tiny prick of confusion. This wasn't the modest, slightly run-down apartment complex I'd pictured for a man supposedly drowning in medical debt. It was a sleek, modern glass and steel building in a trendy neighborhood, with a concierge in the lobby. Maybe his company is paying for it, I mumbled to myself, trying to rationalize it. I gave the concierge David's name and apartment number, and he waved me through without a second glance. My heart hammered against my ribs as the elevator ascended to the 7th floor. This was it, the grand romantic gesture. I found apartment 7B and stood outside the door, my hand raised to knock. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Not just any laughter. It was Sarah's. But it wasn't the tired, strained sound I'd become accustomed to. This was a full, throaty, joyous laugh, unburdened and carefree. It was the laugh I hadn't heard in months, the one I had fallen in love with, and it was intertwined with a man's deep, resonant chuckle. My hand froze in midair. The door was ajar, not fully latched. A sliver of light and sound spilled into the hallway. Against my better judgment, I pushed it open, just a few inches. My mind was still racing to find a plausible explanation.
Maybe David was having a miraculous recovery. Maybe a friend was visiting. My eyes adjusted to the light, and my world tilted on its axis. The apartment was bright and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And there, in the open-plan kitchen, was Sarah. She was wearing a slinky sundress, her hair was down, and she looked radiant, healthy, and happier than I had seen her in years. She was stirring something in a pan, and a man stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He was tall, athletic, and looked the absolute picture of health. It was David. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a brotherly peck on the cheek. It was a long, slow, passionate kiss, a kiss of deep intimacy and familiarity. My stomach dropped to the floor. The welcome home banner in my mind's eye burst into flames. The paella turned to ash in my mouth. My brain, which had been so adept at creating excuses, suddenly went into overdrive, connecting dots I had actively ignored. The vague medical details, the lack of video calls, the expensive apartment, the money. In those few seconds, those few heart-stopping minutes, the entire 94-day lie unraveled. This wasn't a sick room, it was a love nest. I wasn't a supportive husband, I was a fool. I was the unwitting financier of my own wife's affair. I must have made a sound, a choked gasp, because they broke apart and turned towards the door. The moment Sarah's eyes met mine, every drop of color drained from her face. Her joyful expression collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. David, or whatever his name was, just looked confused, then defiant. I pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. My suitcase rolled silently behind me, the sound of its wheels on the hardwood floor like thunder in the sudden silence. "Surprise," I said. My voice was unnervingly calm, a dead, flat thing. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. What are you doing here?" "I got a promotion," I said, the words feeling alien. "I wanted to tell you in person, help you back, fly home together." I looked at the man beside her. "You must be David. Wow. You've made a miraculous recovery. It's a miracle. All that money for experimental treatments really paid off." The sarcasm was thick and bitter. The man, David, stepped forward slightly. He wasn't her brother. I knew that with a certainty that was bone deep. "Look, man," he started. "Don't," I cut him off, my gaze fixed on Sarah. "Don't you dare speak to me. You let him talk, Sarah. You tell me. Who is he?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "Mark, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice finally cracking. "Can you explain the last 3 months? Can you explain the thousands of dollars? Can you explain my sleepless nights worrying about you, about your brother, your actual brother, Sarah? You know, the one who's a happily married accountant in Florida."
I called him last month to see if he needed anything. He and his wife had just gotten back from a cruise. Funny he didn't mention any rare, life-threatening infections. That was it. The final piece. The lie was so audacious, so complete. She hadn't even bothered to invent a fictional brother. She'd just stolen her real one's name. Her face crumpled. The truth was out, and it was uglier than anything I could have imagined. David was her ex-boyfriend from college. They had reconnected at a conference 6 months ago, the business trip she took. The spark was still there, so they concocted this monstrous, elaborate lie so they could have a trial run at a life together, all on my dime. "I was going to tell you," she sobbed, "when I got back. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted." "You seemed to know what you wanted when you took my money," I said, the calmness returning, cold and hard as ice.
You knew what you wanted when you let me work 60-hour weeks to pay for your vacation. You let me eat garbage so you could cook romantic dinners in your love nest. You didn't just cheat on me, Sarah. You robbed me. You stole my money, my time, my trust. You stole 3 months of my life. I didn't wait for an answer. There was nothing more to say. I looked at her one last time. This woman who was a complete and utter stranger to me, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. I turned around, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out of the apartment, leaving them standing in the ruins of the life I thought I had. The flight back was an out-of-body experience. I stared out the window at the clouds, feeling completely numb. When I got home, the balloons were still there, bobbing cheerfully against the ceiling. The "Welcome home, Sarah" mocked me. The smell of the paella, now cold on the stove, made me want to be sick. Methodically, I began to take it all down. I popped each balloon with a fork, the sharp reports echoing the shattering of my heart. I tore the banner from the wall and ripped it to shreds. I scraped the expensive, pointless meal into the trash. When I was done, I sat on the couch in the silent, sterile house. It was a different kind of silence now. Not a waiting silence, but a final one. An ending. The lie had lasted for months, a slow, creeping poison. But the truth had taken only minutes. A swift, brutal blade to the heart. And in the quiet aftermath, as I sat alone amidst the wreckage, I realized that terrible, painful truth had also, finally, set me free.